She didn't ask for help. She only apologized for needing help. At a cold train station, a 7-year-old girl whispered, "I'm sorry," to a stranger and walked away alone. That silent apology shattered a man's life forever and rewrote the girl's life in ways neither could escape. Chicago Union Station breathed like a living thing. Announcements echoed from the high ceiling. Suitcases rattled across the marble floor. Wet boots dragged slush into gray streaks that never quite dried. People moved fast, late for trains, late for meetings, late for lives that didn't wait. In the middle of it all stood Maisie Carter, 7 years old. She was small for her age, blonde hair pulled back with a loose elastic strands escaping to brush her cheeks. A thin white dress hung from her shoulders, wrinkled and not warm enough for the icy air that rushed in every time the doors opened. 2 faded pink backpacks were strapped tightly to her back, their weight forcing her to lean forward, as if she were already carrying more than she should. She watched the man for several minutes before approaching him. Everett Hale, 38, stood near the platform with the stillness of someone who belonged anywhere he chose. His dark overcoat was perfectly tailored. His shoes were spotless despite the slush. The phone in his hand looked more expensive than everything Maisie owned combined. His blue eyes skimmed the crowd, not looking for anyone, just waiting. Maisie took a breath, then another. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet, it almost disappeared into the noise of the station. "I was just asking," she said. A pause. I'm sorry." The words landed softly, but they hit Everett like something sharp. He looked down at her, irritation flickering across his face before he could stop it. He was late. His mind was already elsewhere. A child interrupting him was the last thing he needed. "I'm not an information desk," he said curtly. Maisie flinched, not dramatically. Just a small, practiced reaction. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "I didn't mean to bother you," she whispered. "I'm sorry." And then she stepped away. Not angry, not crying, just apologizing for existing. Everett didn't follow her. He checked his phone instead, thumb scrolling through missed calls and calendar alerts, grounding himself in things that made sense. Meetings, deadlines, numbers that behaved the way they were supposed to. Children got lost all the time, he told himself. Parents panicked, staff intervened. Everything resolved itself. It wasn't his responsibility. He took a few steps toward the exit, then stopped. The apology echoed in his head, not loud, not emotional. Careful. As if it had been rehearsed. As if the girl had already learned that asking for help came with a cost. Everett frowned and glanced back. Maisie was walking slowly across the station floor, the 2 pink backpacks tugging at her shoulders. She didn't scan the crowd, didn't call out, didn't look behind her to see if anyone was watching. She reached a long metal bench near the waiting area and climbed onto it, her feet dangling above the floor. She hugged the backpack straps to her chest and stared straight ahead, waiting. Not for someone specific, just waiting. Everett checked his watch again. He told himself he was being ridiculous. Still, his feet changed direction before his mind caught up. As he approached, he noticed details he hadn't before. A faint dirt smudge on one knee. The redness around her eyes like she'd cried earlier and forced herself to stop. The way she sat perfectly still, as if movement itself might cause trouble. He cleared his throat softly. "Hey," he said, lowering his voice. Maisie looked up slowly. Her blue eyes were calm but tired, older than they should have been. "Where are your parents?" She studied his face for a moment, then nodded politely. "My mom told me to wait here," she said. When Everett asked, Maisie hesitated. "This morning." The answer settled heavily between them. Everett scanned the station instinctively. No frantic adults, no searching eyes, nothing. And for the first time, the station didn't feel busy. It felt careless. Everett sat down on the bench across from her, careful to leave space between them. He was suddenly aware of how large he must seem, his coat, his height, his presence in a child's quiet world. He kept his hands visible, his voice even. "Has she called you?" he asked. Maisie shook her head. "My phone doesn't work," she said quietly. Something tightened in Everett's chest. He paused, choosing his words. "Do you know where she is?" Maisie nodded. "The hospital." "Which one?" Her fingers tightened around the backpack straps. "I forgot the name," she admitted, eyes dropping again. "I was trying to ask you, but I messed it up." Everett inhaled slowly. "Why the hospital?" he asked. Maisie stared at her hands. "She got sick," she said. "She said if something happened, I should stay here. She said grown-ups would help if I asked." Her voice didn't shake, but something about the simplicity of the sentence hurt more than fear would have. "That's why you came to me earlier?" Everett asked. She nodded. "I knew you'd know what to do." The words landed hard. Everett leaned back slightly, the cold metal bench suddenly uncomfortable beneath him. He realized that what had happened earlier wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a moment, a choice. Walking away hadn't been accidental, and neither would staying. He looked at Maisie again, really looked. "All right," he said after a moment. She glanced up, surprise flickering across her face. "Really, yes," Everett replied. "We'll figure this out together." Maisie didn't smile, but something shifted. Not relief, not yet. Just the fragile beginning of trust forming quietly on a cold metal bench in the middle of a station that had almost swallowed her whole. Everett didn't answer right away. The station noise pressed in around them, heels, clicking laughter spilling from somewhere behind glass, the mechanical sigh of a train arriving. Yet the bench felt oddly isolated, like a pocket of stillness the world had forgotten. "You said you were trying to ask me something," Everett said gently. "What was it?" Maisie hesitated. Her shoulders lifted slightly, then dropped again, as if she were bracing for something she expected to hurt. "I wanted to know which train goes to the hospital," she said, but I didn't know how to say it right. Everett frowned. "Which hospital?" She shook her head. "I don't know. My mom said the name, but it was loud and she was already tired. I didn't want to ask again." The words were small, careful, measured. Everett studied her face, the way she chose each sentence like she was stepping on thin ice. "So you decided to ask a stranger," he said. "Why me?" Maisie looked up at him, then meeting his eyes directly for the first time. "You looked like you knew things," she said simply. "And you didn't look angry yet." Something about that answer unsettled him more than fear ever could. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. Maisie nodded, but it was the nod of a child who had learned that agreement didn't always change outcomes. "I know," she replied. "That's why I said sorry." Everett closed his eyes briefly. Children cried when they were scared. They panicked. They demanded help. This child apologized before anyone even refused her. He straightened, decision forming quietly but firmly in his chest. "All right," he said. "First thing, we're going to get you warm. Second, we're going to find your mom." Maisie blinked. "Both, yes," Everett said. "Both." She absorbed this processing slowly, carefully, as if sudden hope might be dangerous. "Okay," she said at last. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. But she sat a little straighter. And Everett knew something irreversible had already begun. They walked through the station together, moving slower than the crowd. Everett matched his steps to Maisie's short stride without thinking. When people passed too close, he shifted slightly, placing himself between her and the rush of bodies. He noticed how she stayed close without touching him, as if she didn't yet know whether she was allowed to. They stopped near a small cafe tucked beside the glass windows. Warm light spilled onto the floor, cutting through the cold gray of the station. The smell of coffee and bread lingered in the air. Maisie glanced at it, then quickly looked away. Everett noticed. "Have you eaten today?" he asked. She hesitated. "My mom gave me a sandwich this morning, but I saved it," she said quietly. "Did you eat it?" Maisie shook her head. "In case she came back hungry." The words landed heavier than Everett expected. He ordered hot chocolate and a simple meal, placing it gently in front of her, like he was afraid sudden generosity might make her disappear. Maisie stared at the cup for a moment, steam curling upward, then wrapped her hands around it. She sighed softly when the warmth reached her fingers. Everett watched her eat slowly, pausing between bites, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to finish. With every minute, the tension in her shoulders eased just a little. "Thank you," she said when she was done. For what Everett asked. For not being mad, she replied. He swallowed. "You never had to apologize," he said. Maisie didn't respond. She just held the cup, letting it warm her hands, as if the words needed time to catch up. When they finished, Everett stepped aside and pulled out his phone. He made calls, hospital information desks, transit offices, non-emergency lines. He spoke quietly, efficiently, but never fully turned his back on her. Maisie listened to his voice more than the words. It was steady, certain. After several minutes, Everett returned and crouched in front of her. "I think we found her," he said carefully. Maisie's breath caught. "You did. She's at a hospital not far from here." Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. "Is she?" Maisie began. "She's alive," Everett said gently. "She's very sick, but she's there." Maisie nodded, pressing her lips together, holding herself still. "My mom said grown-ups would help," she whispered. Everett met her gaze. She was right. They stepped outside into the cold evening air. The wind cut sharply between the buildings, carrying the bite of winter with it. Maisie shivered immediately, her thin dress no match for the temperature. Everett didn't hesitate. He shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was far too big, the sleeves hanging past her hands, the hem brushing her ankles. Maisie froze for a moment. Then she pulled it around herself. "Thank you," she said softly. They walked to the car in silence. Traffic lights reflected off wet pavement as Everett drove the city, sliding past the windows in blurred streaks of white and red. After a while, Maisie spoke. "Will she be mad at me?" Everett glanced at her. "Why would she be for being alone?" Maisie said. "For asking someone else." "No," Everett replied firmly. "She'll be proud of you." Maisie considered this, her small fingers gripping the edge of the coat. "Okay," she said. Her eyelids began to droop, exhaustion finally winning the fight she had been holding back all day. Before they reached the hospital, she had fallen asleep, her breathing slow, and even one hand still clutching the strap of her pink backpack. Everett parked the car and sat there for a moment, watching her sleep. He realized then that this was no longer about helping a lost child at a station. Somewhere between her apology and her quiet trust, something else had taken root, something that wouldn't simply end when she was reunited with her mother. He gently woke her. "Maisie," he said softly. "We're here." She blinked, then nodded, pulling the coat tighter around herself as they stepped toward the hospital doors. Neither of them knew it yet, but the life waiting on the other side would be nothing like the one either of them had planned. The hospital doors slid open with a soft, mechanical sigh. Warm air rushed out to meet them, smelling sharply of disinfectant and something metallic that made Maisie's stomach tighten. The brightness inside felt unnatural after the dim gray of the station, as if emotions weren't meant to exist in a place this clean. Maisie slowed immediately. The sleeves of Everett's coat still swallowed her hands, and she clutched them together at her chest like a shield. Her eyes darted from sign to sign, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Everett approached the reception desk with quiet authority. He spoke calmly, clearly, his voice steady in a way that made people listen. Maisie stood beside him, gripping the strap of her backpack so tightly her fingers ached. She didn't understand most of the words being exchanged. But then she heard her mother's name. Her heart stuttered. After a short wait that felt impossibly long, a nurse appeared and gestured for them to follow. The hallway stretched ahead, narrow and bright, lined with closed doors and hushed voices. Maisie's steps slowed. "What if she's angry?" she whispered. Everett stopped and knelt in front of her, bringing himself to her level. The bustle of the hospital faded around them. "She won't be," he said gently. "And if she is, it won't be because of you." Maisie searched his face as if checking whether his certainty was real. Then she nodded. They walked down the corridor together. The room was quiet. Machines hummed softly. Tubes and wires surrounded the hospital bed, their steady beeping filling the space. For a moment, Maisie froze in the doorway, afraid that moving closer might break something fragile and irreversible. Then the woman in the bed stirred. "Maisie," her mother whispered. The sound of her name broke whatever spell had held her still. Maisie rushed forward, dropping her backpacks on the floor as she climbed carefully onto the chair beside the bed. She took her mother's hand in both of hers, holding on as if letting go might make her disappear. "I waited," Maisie said quickly. "I didn't move. I asked someone like you said." Tears filled her mother's eyes. "I know," she murmured. "I'm so proud of you." Only then did she notice Everett standing quietly near the door. "Who is this?" her mother asked softly. Everett stepped forward, unsure of his place, but unwilling to retreat. "My name is Everett," he said. "I found Maisie at the station. She was alone." Her mother closed her eyes briefly, emotion flickering across her pale face. "Thank you," she said when she opened them again. "She was brave," Everett replied. "Braver than most adults." The doctor entered not long after, speaking in careful tones, honest but restrained. Maisie didn't understand every word, but she understood enough. Her mother was very sick. Things wouldn't simply go back to normal. She stayed silent, holding her mother's hand, listening as if the sound of her voice might anchor her to the world. When the doctor left, the room felt smaller. "I didn't want you to be alone," her mother said quietly, looking at Maisie. "That's why I told you to wait there." "I wasn't alone," Maisie replied, glancing at Everett. "He helped me." Her mother met Everett's eyes again, gratitude mixed with exhaustion. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to," Everett replied. "I'll stay until you're better." The words surprised him as much as anyone else. Maisie looked up at him, her eyes wide. "You will?" "Yes," Everett said. "I'm here." She nodded slowly, as if storing the promise somewhere deep and fragile. The hours that followed blurred together. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped steadily. Maisie stayed close to her mother whenever she was allowed, sitting quietly, absorbing every small movement and breath. Everett remained nearby, speaking to doctors, asking questions, listening carefully. He checked his phone only once to cancel everything else. As night settled outside the hospital windows, Maisie leaned back in the chair, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. "You stayed," she murmured. Everett looked at her. "I said I would." For the first time since that night at the station, something changed in Maisie's expression. It wasn't happiness, not relief, just the fragile beginning of believing someone meant what they said. Time inside the hospital moved strangely. Morning and evening lost their meaning, replaced by visiting hours, quiet conversations, and the constant rhythm of machines that never slept. Maisie stayed close to her mother whenever she could. Everett's coat still draped over her shoulders, even when nurses offered her a blanket of her own. Everett came every day. At first, Maisie expected him to disappear. Adults usually did. They helped briefly, then returned to their lives. But Everett kept coming back, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes late at night after work. Always calm, always there. He brought small things that mattered more than he realized. Fresh fruit, a coloring book and pencils, a warm sweater that actually fit. He spoke to the doctors when Maisie's mother was too tired, listened carefully, and took notes on his phone the way he did during meetings. Only now his focus was entirely different. Maisie watched him closely, learning his habits without realizing it. She noticed how his expression softened when he looked at her mother, how he never checked his watch while he was with them, how he always made sure she was within sight. One afternoon, while her mother slept, Everett and Maisie sat together in the hallway. Maisie swung her legs, slowly tracing invisible shapes on the floor with her shoes. "Are you very busy?" she asked suddenly. Everett considered the question. "I used to be," he said honestly. And now she asked. Now he replied, "I'm where I need to be." Maisie nodded, accepting the answer without pressing further. That evening, her mother woke up more alert than she had been in days. She asked Everett to stay while Maisie was taken to the playroom by a nurse. The room felt different without Maisie's quiet presence. "You didn't have to do all this," her mother said softly. "I know," Everett replied. "But I wanted to." She studied him carefully. Why Everett hesitated? "Because she asked," he said, "and because someone should have answered." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "She's always been like that," she whispered, apologizing for needing help. Everett looked down. "She shouldn't have to," he said quietly. Maisie noticed the change before anyone said a word. It wasn't dramatic. There were no alarms, no rushed footsteps. It came quietly, the way the most frightening things often did. In the way the nurses spoke more softly. In the way they paused before answering questions. In the way her mother's smiles seemed shorter now, as if they cost too much energy to hold. That morning, Maisie wasn't allowed to sit by the bed right away. A nurse guided her gently into the hallway, voice calm but careful. Maisie didn't argue. She nodded and walked out, clutching one of her pink backpacks to her chest like armor. Everett followed, his jaw set, his steps measured. Something tense burned behind his eyes, though his face remained composed. They sat together in the waiting area, surrounded by strangers, pretending not to listen. Maisie's legs didn't swing this time. They stayed still, her feet pressed flat against the floor. "Is she getting worse?" Maisie asked quietly. Everett took a slow breath. "She's very tired," he said carefully. "The doctors are doing everything they can." Maisie nodded, absorbing the words. Her fingers tightened around the backpack straps. "I don't like when people say that," she said after a moment. "Why not?" Everett asked. "They say it when they don't know what will happen." Everett didn't correct her. She was right. Hours passed. The sounds of the hospital continued around them. Footsteps murmured, conversations, the distant hum of machines. At some point, a doctor approached Everett and spoke in low tones, using words Maisie couldn't fully understand, but could feel in the pit of her stomach. Everett listened without interrupting his expression, controlled, nodding once at the end. When he turned back to Maisie, she was already looking at him. "You know," she said. "Yes," Everett replied quietly. "I know." Her throat tightened. "Can I see her?" After a pause, he nodded. Inside the room, her mother looked smaller than ever. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. The beeping machines seemed louder now, each sound echoing in Maisie's chest. Maisie approached the bed slowly, as if moving too fast might break something invisible. She took her mother's hand carefully. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. "I'm here." Her mother opened her eyes and smiled faintly, a smile full of love and apology all at once. "I know you are," she murmured. "You always are." Everett stood a short distance away, giving them space, feeling more powerless than he ever had in boardrooms or negotiations. He could solve problems. He could control outcomes. But not this. And for the first time he understood that staying was no longer enough. Visiting hours ended too quickly. A nurse stepped in, gently apologetic but firm. Maisie stood without protest, though her hand lingered in her mother's, until the very last second, fingers slipping away slowly, reluctantly. That night, Everett took Maisie home with him for the first time. The decision was made quietly, without ceremony. No one announced it. No one argued. It simply happened because there was nowhere else she could go. Everett's apartment felt enormous and silent. The lights reflected off clean surfaces untouched by small hands or toys. Maisie stood just inside the doorway, unsure whether she was allowed to step further. "You can sleep here," Everett said, gesturing toward the couch and then the spare bed. "Wherever you feel safe." Maisie considered this carefully. She chose the couch. She curled into herself, pulling her knees to her chest, one arm wrapped tightly around her backpack. "Can you stay?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Everett didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Maisie fell asleep quickly, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Everett remained nearby, sitting in the dim light, listening to the quiet. He understood then that whatever happened next, his life was no longer just his own. The call came early the next morning. Everett answered it from the kitchen, voice low, body already tense. He listened without interrupting, gripping the edge of the counter so tightly his knuckles turned white. When he hung up, the apartment felt unbearably still. Maisie was still asleep, curled around her backpack like it was something alive. Everett knelt beside her and touched her shoulder gently. "Maisie," he said softly. "Sweetheart." Her eyes opened slowly, fear rising instantly before he spoke. "It's my mom," she whispered. Everett nodded. "She wants to see you," he said. "Right now." The drive back to the hospital was silent. The city hadn't fully woken yet. The sky was pale and uncertain. Maisie stared straight ahead, hands folded tightly in her lap. Everett wanted to say something comforting, anything, but every sentence felt like a lie. They were taken directly to the room. Maisie's mother looked peaceful, in a way that terrified her more than any machine ever had. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. When Maisie took her hand, she felt how weak it had become. Maisie climbed carefully onto the chair beside the bed. "I'm here," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. "I didn't forget." Her mother opened her eyes slowly and smiled. "I know," she whispered. "You never forget." Tears spilled down Maisie's cheeks. She leaned closer, resting her forehead gently against her mother's hand. "I was scared," she admitted. "But he stayed. He didn't leave me." Her mother's gaze shifted toward Everett, gratitude washing over her tired face. "Thank you," she said quietly. Everett shook his head. "She did all the brave parts herself," he replied. "I just listened." The time they had was short. Maisie talked about small things, the station, the hot chocolate, how Everett's coat was too big but warm. Her mother listened as if every word mattered more than air. "I need you to remember something," her mother said softly, her voice growing weaker. "You didn't do anything wrong. Asking for help saved you." Maisie nodded, tears streaming. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I said sorry." Her mother smiled faintly. "You don't have to apologize for needing someone," she said. "Promise me you'll remember that." "I promise," Maisie said, though her voice broke. Everett stood quietly nearby, his presence steady, his heart aching with a grief that wasn't his alone anymore. When the nurse finally stepped in, Maisie didn't scream or fight. She leaned back against Everett's chest, her small hands clutching his coat. When it was over, the room felt unbearably still. They left the hospital together, Maisie holding Everett's hand tightly, now no longer afraid to reach for it. Outside, the day had fully arrived. Bright, indifferent, and nothing would ever be the same again. Time did not move the way it used to after the funeral. It slowed, then lurched forward, then stopped altogether without warning. The days that followed felt heavy but strangely hollow, as if the world itself was unsure how to behave after what had been taken. Maisie stayed close to Everett, not constantly touching him anymore, but always aware of where he was. She watched him from doorways, from the edge of the couch, from the kitchen table, as if seeing him was proof that he hadn't vanished like everyone else eventually did. Some mornings, she woke up calm. She helped Everett make breakfast, carefully placing plates on the table, lining the utensils just right. Order made things feel safer, predictable. Other days, she refused to get dressed. She sat on the bed with her knees pulled to her chest, eyes distant and sharp anger simmering beneath the quiet. Everett learned quickly that there was no correct response, no single sentence that fixed grief. So he stayed. He listened without correcting. He apologized when he made mistakes instead of pretending he knew what he was doing. When Maisie snapped at him for no reason, he didn't scold her. When she went silent for hours, he didn't force words out of her. The apartment changed slowly. The two pink backpacks no longer sat by the door like emergency luggage. Their contents were unpacked, folded into drawers. Everett bought Maisie clothes that fit. Books she chose herself. A small nightlight for her room after she admitted one evening, almost casually, that the dark felt louder than the light. At night, when memories crept in and sleep refused to come, Everett would sit beside her bed without speaking. He stayed until her breathing slowed and her hands relaxed, the weight of the day finally loosening its grip. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was shared. And in that quiet, something fragile began to take shape. Not happiness, not yet, but stability. The kind that didn't promise everything would be okay. Only that she wouldn't be alone while it wasn't. The questions came soon after. They arrived politely, professionally wrapped in careful language and official smiles. Social workers, case files, forms that needed signatures. Conversations held just outside Maisie's hearing, but never far enough. Everett answered everything calmly. Yes, he had found her at the station. Yes, he had stayed. No, he was not related by blood. Maisie noticed the shift immediately. She grew quieter again, that old habit creeping back in. She watched adults talk about her as if she were an object passed gently from hand to hand, a responsibility, a problem to be solved. One afternoon, while Everett spoke with a social worker in the kitchen, Maisie sat on the couch, knees tucked in, listening. Temporary placement, best interests of the child, long-term stability. The words made her chest feel tight. She stood and walked toward the kitchen without thinking. I can be good, she said suddenly. The adults froze. Everett turned, heart-dropping. Maisie, I won't be loud, she continued. I won't ask for much. I'll clean up. I won't bother anyone. The social worker's expression softened, but Everett's chest burned. He knelt in front of her immediately. Stop, he said gently but firmly. You don't have to earn a place here. Maisie's eyes filled. I know, she said quickly. I just want to help. Everett took her small hands in his. You are not a problem to solve, he said. You are a person to be protected. The words settled slowly. Not completely, but enough. That night, Everett lay awake long after Maisie had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling. He understood now that staying meant more than kindness. It meant commitment, paperwork, questions, sacrifices he hadn't planned for. And yet the idea of letting her go felt unthinkable. He realized something with quiet certainty. He wasn't helping anymore. He was choosing. School began a few months later. On the first morning, Maisie stood at the gate holding Everett's hand, her posture stiff with nervous energy. Her white dress had been replaced by a simple jacket and sneakers. Her backpack was lighter now, but she still carried it like something precious. What if I say the wrong thing? She asked quietly. Everett crouched down in front of her, meeting her eyes. Then you'll say the wrong thing, he said gently, and the world won't end. She studied his face, weighing the truth of it. Then she nodded and walked inside without looking back. Everett stood there longer than necessary, watching the doors close behind her, feeling something unfamiliar twist in his chest. Pride. That afternoon, Maisie burst through the doors with a smile that caught him completely off guard. "I didn't say sorry once," she announced proudly. Everett smiled back. "I'm proud of you." A year after the night they met, they passed through Chicago Union Station together. It wasn't planned. They simply had to cross it on their way somewhere else. Still, Maisie slowed as they walked through the familiar space. Her eyes scanned the crowd, the benches, the platforms. "This is where it happened," she said quietly. Everett nodded. "This is where you were brave." She stopped near the same bench where she had once waited alone. "I thought asking was a mistake," she said. "I thought I was bothering people." Everett knelt beside her. "You asked because you needed help," he said. "That's not weakness. That's how you survived." Maisie thought for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, not hesitantly, but naturally. "I'm glad I asked you," she said. Everett squeezed her hand gently. "So am I." And as they blended back into the moving crowd, Maisie walked forward, knowing something she would carry with her forever. That asking for help could change everything. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was thin, official, quietly heavy. Everett read it twice before the words fully settled. A scheduled review, temporary guardianship, further evaluation required. The language was neutral, polite, careful not to promise anything. Maisie watched him from the kitchen table, coloring slowly, her movements deliberate. "Is it bad?" she asked. Everett folded the letter and set it down. "No," he said. "It just means we have to talk to some people." She nodded, accepting the answer without pressing, but that night she had trouble sleeping. Everett noticed the way she hovered in doorways again, the way her apologies tried to return, slipping into her sentences like old reflexes. "Sorry for the noise. Sorry I forgot. Sorry I asked." He stopped her gently every time. "You don't need to say that." "I know," she replied quickly. I know," he said again, and stayed. The meetings were exhausting. Offices with muted colors, chairs designed to be comfortable but never quite were. People who meant well but asked the same questions in different ways. Everett answered everything honestly. Yes, he had resources. Yes, he had support. Yes, he understood the responsibility. And then came the question no one asked out loud. Why would a man with his life, his schedule, his freedom choose this? Everett realized something then. He didn't have a perfect answer. He only had the truth. Because walking away would have broken something he couldn't fix. Maisie was asked questions too. Gently, carefully. How do you feel living with Everett? Do you feel safe? Do you miss your mother? Maisie answered quietly. She didn't cry. She didn't dramatize. She just told the truth. I miss her, she said. But I'm not alone. The room went very still after that. That night, Everett found Maisie sitting on the couch with her knees pulled up, staring at nothing. What are you thinking about? He asked. She hesitated. If they say no, she said. If I have to go somewhere else. Everett sat beside her. Then I'll fight, he said simply. She turned to him. Fight who, anyone, he replied. Including myself if I have to. Maisie studied his face for a long moment. You don't have to, she said softly. Everett shook his head. I know, he said, but I want to. And for the first time, she leaned into his side without asking. The hearing was held in a room that didn't feel like it belonged to children. The chairs were too tall, the tables too wide. Everything echoed. Maisie sat beside Everett, feet not quite touching the floor, hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore the blue sweater he had bought her, the one that fit just right. Across the room, people spoke in measured tones. Terms like stability, continuity, long-term planning floated through the air. Maisie listened carefully. Too carefully. At one point, she leaned forward as if she were about to say something. Everett felt it before he saw it, the old instinct rising. He gently placed a hand over hers. She stopped, The judge finally addressed her directly. "Maisie," she said kindly, "do you understand why we're here today?" Maisie nodded. "You're deciding where I should live. And what do you want?" the judge asked. The room held its breath. Maisie opened her mouth. "I'm sorry." Everett's hand tightened slightly. She paused. Then she swallowed. "I want to stay," she said. "With Everett." No apology, no explanation, just truth. The silence afterward felt like standing at the edge of something irreversible. The decision wasn't immediate. It never was. But when they stepped outside, Maisie exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. "I almost said it," she admitted. Everett looked at her. "I know. But I didn't," she added, a small note of wonder in her voice. He smiled. "You didn't." They walked home together in the late afternoon light, the city moving around them indifferent and alive. That night, Maisie asked a question she had never asked before. "Will I always live here?" Everett didn't answer quickly. "I don't know what always looks like yet," he said honestly. "But I know what now looks like." What she asked. He met her gaze. "Now looks like you're home." She nodded slowly, as if committing the word to memory. The call came weeks later. Everett stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, listening as the social worker spoke. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pace. He simply listened. When the call ended, he stayed exactly where he was for a long moment. Maisie was in the living room drawing. She looked up. "Is it done?" Everett crossed the room and knelt in front of her. "Yes," he said. "You're staying." Her pencil slipped from her fingers. She didn't cry. She didn't jump up or cheer. She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. Everett closed his eyes, the weight of it finally settling, relief, responsibility, love, all tangled together. "I won't be in the way," she whispered instinctively. Everett pulled back just enough to look at her. "You were never in the way," he said. "You were the way." The weeks that followed didn't feel dramatic. They felt normal, and that Everett realized was the miracle. Mornings with rushed breakfasts, evenings with homework spread across the table, arguments over bedtime, laughter that caught him off guard. Maisie still had hard days. Grief didn't vanish. It softened, shifted, returned unexpectedly, but she no longer carried it alone. One evening, as Everett tucked her into bed, she asked, "Do you remember the station?" "Yes," he said. "I was scared there," she admitted. "I thought asking was wrong." Everett brushed her hair back gently. And now, she said, thinking, "I think asking saved me." He smiled. "Yes," he said softly. "It did." The room grew quiet as Maisie drifted toward sleep, the nightlight casting soft shapes on the wall. Everett stayed a moment longer, listening to her breathing. He thought about how none of this had begun with a grand gesture. Just a small voice, a careful apology, and a choice not to walk away. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was thin, official. The kind of envelope that looked harmless until you opened it and felt your stomach drop. Everett stood at the kitchen counter, coffee cooling beside his hand, and read it once, then twice, then a third time, slowly, like the meaning might change if he stared hard enough. Temporary placement review, assessment required, next steps. The language was polite, careful, almost gentle, and that was the problem. It didn't say yes. It didn't say no. It just reminded him that Maisie's life was still considered a file. Across the table, Maisie colored in a workbook, tongue slightly peeking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Her hair was still blonde and fine, still prone to slipping loose, no matter how neatly he tried to tie it. The pink backpacks sat against the wall, now unpacked, but never far, like she didn't fully trust the world not to make her run again. She looked up. Immediately. As if she could feel the paper changing the air. "Is it bad?" she asked. Everett folded the letter, held it between two fingers, as if it might cut him. "No," he said. "It just means we have to talk to some people." Maisie nodded the way she always did when she didn't want to take up space with questions. "Okay," she said softly, and lowered her eyes back to the page. But that night, the old reflex began to creep back in. She hovered near doorways like she was waiting to be told where she was allowed to stand. She asked permission for things she didn't need permission for, and the apology quiet automatic started sneaking into her sentences. "Sorry," she whispered when she dropped a spoon. "Sorry," she murmured when she asked for a glass of water. "Sorry," she started to say when she climbed onto the couch. Everett stopped her each time. Not sharply, not with frustration, but with a steady correction. He repeated like a prayer. "You don't need to say that." Maisie would blink up at him, startled, as if the words didn't fully belong in her world. Then she'd nod quickly. I know she would say, even when the apology still trembled behind her teeth. The meetings began that week. Offices painted in soft colors meant to soothe. Chairs meant to feel welcoming, but never did. People with kind eyes who introduced themselves gently and still asked questions that made Everett's chest tighten. "Can you describe the circumstances of the initial contact? Do you have prior experience with children? What support system do you have? How would you manage long-term care with your work schedule?" Everett answered honestly, precisely. He kept his tone calm even when the questions felt like they were weighing his worthiness on a scale. Yes, he had resources. Yes, he had flexibility. Yes, he had already rearranged his life. No, he wasn't related by blood. And then came the question nobody asked out loud, but everybody carried in their posture. Why would someone like him, private, controlled, busy, choose this kind of responsibility? Everett realized something as he watched Maisie's small hands folded in her lap, her feet not reaching the floor. He didn't have a perfect answer, not one that sounded impressive or clean. He only had the truth, because he had looked at a child who apologized for asking for help, and something inside him had refused to let her disappear again. Maisie was asked questions too in a smaller room with softer voices. "Do you feel safe with Everett? Do you miss your mother? What do you want to happen next?" Maisie answered quietly. She didn't dramatize. She didn't plead. She just said what was real. "I miss my mom," she whispered, "but I'm not alone." The room went very still after that, as if the adults had forgotten children could be that brave without shouting. That night, Everett found her on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the dark TV screen like it might show her future if she waited long enough. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Maisie didn't look at him at first. "If they say no," she said. "If I have to go somewhere else." Everett sat beside her close enough to be felt not so close it would overwhelm her. "Then I'll fight," he said simply. She turned to him, eyes wide. "Fight who?" Anyone, Everett replied. "Including myself if I have to." Maisie stared at him for a long moment. Then, in a voice small enough to break him, she said, "You don't have to." Everett shook his head once. "I know," he said, "but I want to." And for the first time, she leaned into his side without asking permission. The hearing took place in a room that didn't feel like it belonged to children. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse than that, neutral. Clean lines, hard chairs, a flag in the corner, a clock that ticked loudly enough to make silence feel sharp. Maisie sat beside Everett, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore the blue sweater he'd bought her, soft, warm, the sleeves the perfect length. She'd chosen it herself that morning, standing in front of her dresser with the serious focus of someone preparing armor. Everett sat straight, shoulders squared, face composed. He had walked into boardrooms full of men who wanted to crush him with smiles. He had negotiated deals worth more than most people could imagine. None of that had made his hands sweat the way this did. Across the room, people spoke in careful tones. Words floated through the air like something too delicate to touch. Stability, continuity, best interests, long-term planning. Everett listened, answered when asked, kept his voice even. But every few minutes he glanced sideways at Maisie, checking for cracks, checking for that old invisible flinch. Maisie didn't cry. She didn't fidget. She listened too carefully, like she believed one wrong movement could cost her everything. A woman with kind eyes, someone in a robe, someone everyone treated with quiet respect, finally leaned forward and addressed Maisie directly. "Maisie," she said gently, "do you understand why we're here today?" Maisie nodded. "You're deciding where I should live. And what do you want?" the woman asked. "Not what you think we want to hear. What you want." The room held its breath. Maisie's mouth opened. "I'm sorry." Everett's hand moved without thinking. He placed it lightly over hers, steady pressure, not stopping her voice, just anchoring her. Maisie froze, swallowed, then she tried again. "I want to stay," she said, clearer this time. "With Everett, no apology, no extra explanation, just the truth standing on its own." Something shifted in the room. Everett didn't let himself hope too hard, but he felt it like the air changed direction. Like the adults remembered that children were not paperwork. The decision wasn't immediate. It never was. The hearing ended with polite words, "and we'll be in touch." And Everett walked out with Maisie beside him into the cold afternoon. Outside, the sky was pale, the wind sharp, but Maisie exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. "I almost said it," she admitted, looking down at her shoes. Everett glanced at her. "I know." Maisie's fingers curled around the strap of her backpack. "But I didn't." "You didn't," Everett repeated, letting the pride in his voice show. They walked in silence for a while, the city moving around them. Cars hissed over wet pavement. People hurried past with their own worries. Maisie finally asked a question she had never dared to ask before. "Will I always live here?" Everett slowed. He didn't offer a lie. He didn't offer a promise he couldn't keep. He stopped and crouched in front of her, bringing himself down to her level the way he had in the station. The hospital, the apartment doorway, always lowering himself so she wouldn't feel small. "I don't know what always looks like yet," he said honestly. "But I know what now looks like." Maisie's eyes searched his. What Everett met her gaze without flinching. "Now looks like you're home." Maisie nodded slowly, as if the word needed to settle into her bones before she could believe it. Then quietly, she reached for his hand. Not the desperate grip from the day her mother died. A steadier one. A child learning what it felt like to choose safety without apologizing for it. The call came on a Friday. Everett was in the kitchen again, because so many life-changing moments seemed to happen in ordinary places. The morning light fell across the counter, soft and indifferent, and for a second, everything looked normal. His phone buzzed. He stared at the screen before answering as if delaying could change the outcome. Then he pressed it to his ear. He listened. He didn't interrupt. Didn't pace. Didn't speak until spoken to. His face stayed controlled, but his chest felt tight, like he was holding his breath underwater. When the call ended, Everett stayed exactly where he was for a long moment. In the living room, Maisie sat at the coffee table, drawing careful lines, bright colors. She glanced up, sensing the change in the air the way she always did. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. Everett crossed the room and knelt in front of her. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. "Yes," he said. "You're staying." Maisie's pencil slipped from her fingers. For a heartbeat, she didn't move, like her body didn't trust the words enough to react. Then she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. It wasn't a dramatic, sobbing hug. It was tighter than that. Desperate in its quietness, like she was making sure he was real. Everett closed his eyes. Relief hit him first, hot, sharp, unexpected. Then responsibility, then something deeper and more frightening, because it didn't have a name he could control. Love, maybe. Maisie pulled back just enough to look at him, and the old reflex tried to rise again. "I won't be in the way," she whispered automatically. Everett's throat tightened. He held her shoulders gently and made her meet his eyes. "You were never in the way," he said. "You were the way." Maisie blinked, confused by the sentence, but something in his tone told her it mattered. Her mouth trembled slightly, like she might cry, like she might laugh, like she might do both, and didn't know which was allowed. Instead, she nodded. Slowly. Carefully. Storing the words somewhere safe. The weeks that followed weren't dramatic. They were normal. And Everett realized that normal, real normal, was the miracle. Mornings filled with rushed breakfasts and misplaced socks. Evenings with homework spread across the table. Tiny arguments about bedtime. Everett learning how to braid hair badly and then practicing until it was less bad. Maisie learning that she could leave a glass on the counter without being punished for forgetting. Some nights were still hard. Grief didn't disappear. It arrived in waves, unexpected, unfair. Certain songs made Maisie go quiet. Certain smells made her stare into space. Sometimes she would wake from a dream and sit up, breath shallow, eyes wide. Everett learned not to ask too many questions in those moments. He learned to sit beside her and let silence do its work. One evening, as he tucked her into bed, Maisie stared at the nightlight glowing softly against the wall. "Do you remember the station?" she asked. "Yes," Everett said. "I was scared there," she admitted. "I thought asking was wrong." Everett brushed her hair back gently, the motion slow and steady. And now Maisie thought for a long moment, like she was choosing her words with care. And now she whispered, "I think asking saved me." Everett's chest ached in the quietest way. "Yes," he said softly. "It did." Maisie's eyes grew heavy, her breathing slowed, but before she fell asleep, her hand reached out from beneath the blanket. Everett took it. No speeches, no grand gestures, just a hand in the dark. A promise that didn't need to make noise to be real. Did this story move you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss other heartwarming stories. Click on the last screen to see the next emotional chapter waiting for you. See you in the next story.